Pick something up, anything, a pen, a cup, your phone. Feel it in your hand. Feel the weight. Feel the texture. Feel the solid surface pressing against your skin. You're touching it. Obviously, your hand is in contact with the object. Skin against surface. Direct physical contact. Except it's not. You're not touching that object. You've never touched any object. Not once in your entire life. Not your mother when you were born. Not the food you eat. Not the ground you walk on. Not the person you love. You have never made contact with anything, and you never will. This isn't a metaphor. This isn't philosophy. This is physics. This is what's actually happening at the atomic level every time you think you're touching something. And once you understand it, you'll never feel the same way about your own hands again. Let me show you. Start with what you think is happening. You reach out. Your hand moves toward an object. Your skin gets closer and closer until finally, contact. Your atoms meet the object's atoms. They press together. They touch. That's what touching means, right? Two things making contact. Two surfaces meeting. Wrong. Your atoms never meet the object's atoms. They never make contact. They never touch. They can't. It's physically impossible. Here's why. Everything is made of atoms. Your hand, the cup, the table, the air, all atoms. About 7 billion atoms in your body alone. And atoms have a structure. At the center there's a nucleus. Protons and neutrons packed together in an impossibly small space. Around the nucleus there are electrons, not orbiting like planets, not following neat paths, but existing as a cloud of probability, a fuzzy shell of negative charge surrounding the positive nucleus. This cloud defines where the electron might be found. But it's not a solid shell. It's a haze, a smear of probability. When your hand approaches an object, it's really your atoms approaching the object's atoms. Trillions of them, moving closer. And as they get close, something happens. The electron clouds start to interact. The outer edges of your atoms meet the outer edges of the object's atoms. And that's where the trouble begins. Electrons are negatively charged. All electrons. Yours and the object's. And here's a fundamental law of the universe. Like charges repel. Negative pushes away negative. Always, without exception. As your hand gets closer to the object, the electron clouds of your atoms approach the electron clouds of the object's atoms. Negative approaches negative, and they push each other away. Hard. This repulsion is electromagnetic. It's the same force that makes magnets push apart when you put north to north. Except it's happening at the atomic scale, between every atom in your hand and every atom in the object. Trillions upon trillions of tiny repulsions, all happening simultaneously. And this repulsion prevents contact. Your electrons push against the object's electrons. They refuse to overlap. They refuse to occupy the same space. They push and push and push. And that pushing is what you feel as touch. You're not feeling contact. You're feeling repulsion. You're feeling electromagnetic force. You're feeling your atoms being shoved away from the object's atoms. There's always a gap. Always. A tiny gap between your atoms and the object's atoms. The electrons never touch. The atoms never touch. Nothing ever touches. That sensation in your hand right now, that feeling of holding something solid, that's the feeling of electromagnetic repulsion. That's the feeling of trillions of electrons screaming at each other to stay away. That's the feeling of a force field, if you want to think of it that way. An invisible barrier that nothing can cross. You're not touching the object. You're hovering above it, separated by an unbridgeable gap, held apart by the fundamental forces of nature. Now let's go deeper. How big is this gap? Incredibly small. About 0.1 nanometers, a tenth of a billionth of a meter. Far too small to see, far too small to feel as a gap, but it's there. It's always there. It's never zero. You might say that's close enough. A tenth of a nanometer is essentially touching. For all practical purposes, it's contact. But that misses the point. The point is that no matter how hard you push, no matter how much force you apply, you cannot close that gap. You cannot make your atoms actually touch the object's atoms. The electromagnetic repulsion increases as you get closer. Push harder and the repulsion pushes back harder. It's an asymptotic barrier. You can get closer and closer, but never arrive. This is why you can't push your hand through a table. Not because the table is solid, not because there's stuff in the way. The table is mostly empty space. Your hand is mostly empty space. Almost entirely empty space, in fact. If you removed all the empty space from all the atoms in your body, compressed them down to just the nuclei and electrons, you would be smaller than a grain of sand, a speck of dust. Everything that makes you physically, you would fit on the tip of a needle. If atoms were the size of a baseball stadium, the nucleus would be a fly at the center. The electrons would be gnats buzzing around the outer seats. Everything in between, the vast majority of the stadium, is empty. Nothing there, just vacuum. You're mostly nothing. The table is mostly nothing. The earth is mostly nothing. Every object you've ever seen is almost entirely empty space with tiny particles scattered through it. So why can't two nothings pass through each other? Because of the electromagnetic force. Because electrons refuse to share space. Because negative repels negative with a force so strong that all the empty space in the universe can't help you. The force doesn't care about the empty space. The force only cares about the charged particles. And the charged particles say no. Here's something that should disturb you even more. The electromagnetic force is absurdly strong, incomprehensibly strong. If you compare it to gravity, the other force you're familiar with, electromagnetic force is about 10 to the 36th power times stronger. That's a 1 followed by 36 zeros. A billion times stronger. Gravity is pathetically weak. The entire Earth, all 6 trillion kilograms of it, is pulling you down right now. And you can defeat that pull just by standing up. Your legs can overpower the gravitational attraction of an entire planet. That's how weak gravity is. But the electromagnetic force, you can't overpower that. You can push as hard as you want. You will never force your atoms to touch another object's atoms. The force is too strong. The repulsion is absolute. This is why matter feels solid. Not because it is solid. Not because there's no space in it. There's almost nothing but space in it. Matter feels solid because the electromagnetic force is so overwhelmingly powerful that it creates an impenetrable barrier wherever charged particles meet. Solidity is an illusion, a very convincing illusion created by electromagnetic repulsion, but an illusion nonetheless. Now let's make it worse. When you sit in a chair, you think you're resting on the chair. Your body is in contact with the seat, supported by it, touching it. No, you're floating. You're hovering a fraction of a nanometer above the chair, suspended by electromagnetic repulsion. The electrons in your body are pushing against the electrons in the chair, and that mutual repulsion is holding you up. You're levitating. Right now, on an invisible cushion of electromagnetic force. When you walk on the ground, your feet never touch the floor. They hover above it, pushed up by electron repulsion. Every step you take is a step on nothing, on force, on the invisible hand of electromagnetism holding you up. When you shake someone's hand, your atoms never meet their atoms. The electrons push away from each other. What you feel as the warmth and pressure of human contact is actually the sensation of being repelled, pushed away, kept apart. You have never touched another person. Not really. Not at the atomic level. There's always been a gap. There always will be. Think about what this means for everything you've ever felt. The kiss you remember, electromagnetic repulsion between your lips and theirs. A gap, always a gap. No matter how close you pressed, no matter how intimate the moment felt, your atoms never met their atoms. You were pushing against force fields. The hug from your mother, electron clouds pushing against electron clouds. No contact. The warmth you felt was infrared radiation crossing the gap, and the pressure was repulsion. Two separate objects pressing against the invisible barrier between them, unable to merge, unable to truly touch. Holding your child for the first time, repulsion. The tiny hand you held, repulsion. The weight of them in your arms, repulsion. With the feeling of warm sand on a beach, your feet hovering above the sand, suspended by force. You are walking on a force field, not on matter. Every handshake, every pat on the back, every moment of physical connection you've ever experienced was two clouds of electrons refusing to share space, pushing apart, keeping distance, forever separated by the fundamental laws of the universe. Every texture you've ever felt, rough or smooth, hard or soft, that's not information about the surface itself. That's information about how the electromagnetic force behaves when your electrons approach those particular electrons. Roughness is a pattern of repulsion. Smoothness is a different pattern. But it's all repulsion. It's all force. It's never contact. You might be thinking this is just semantics. We call it touching, even if there's a tiny gap. The word touch means this sensation, this electromagnetic interaction. Fine. We can define words however we want, but consider what you're actually experiencing. You're not detecting objects. You're detecting forces. Your nerves respond to pressure, and pressure is force per unit area. The force comes from electromagnetic repulsion. Your entire sense of touch, everything you've ever felt with your skin, is just your nervous system detecting how hard electrons are pushing against each other. You feel force. You call it touch, but there's no contact involved. There's no meeting. There's no two things becoming one at the surface. There's just force across a gap. Always the gap. Your fingertips have some of the highest densities of nerve endings in your body, exquisitely sensitive, able to detect the finest textures, but all they're really detecting is the shape of the electromagnetic repulsion. The pattern of the force field, the way the electrons push back. They're not feeling objects. They're feeling the boundary where objects refuse to let you in. Here's another thing that should change how you see this. Your sense of touch evolved to keep you alive, to detect threats, to find food, to navigate the physical world. It didn't evolve to tell you the truth about atoms. It evolved to be useful. The sensation of solidity is useful. If you felt the gap, if you perceived the hovering, if you experienced the electromagnetic repulsion as it actually is, you'd be confused. You'd be slower to react. You'd be less effective at surviving. So your brain lies to you. It tells you that you're touching things. It creates the illusion of contact because that illusion is useful. But useful isn't true. And the truth is that you're floating through a world of force fields, never making contact with anything, suspended by electromagnetic repulsion at every moment of your existence. Now let's go to the extreme. Is there any way to actually touch something, to truly make contact? The only way to get atoms to merge is through nuclear fusion. Smash nuclei together hard enough and they'll combine. That's what happens in the sun. Hydrogen nuclei are forced together so violently that they fuse into helium. But this requires temperatures of millions of degrees, pressures beyond anything on Earth. And it's not touching. It's merging, becoming one thing, destroying the separate identities of the atoms involved. Short of nuclear fusion, there is no contact. There is only repulsion. There is only force. There is only the gap. Even when things seem to merge, they don't. When you eat food, when you digest it, when it becomes part of your body, the atoms are still separate. They're bound together by electromagnetic attraction, held in molecules and structures, but the individual atoms never touch. They're always separated by that tiny gap, forever alone, forever apart, interacting only through force, never through contact. You are made of atoms that have never touched each other. Your entire body is a collection of particles held together by forces, suspended in a web of attraction and repulsion, never making contact. You are a cloud, a pattern, a structure of relationships between things that never meet. Here's the deepest thing to consider. Right now, you probably feel solid. You feel like a thing, a continuous physical object with boundaries and surfaces. But you're not. You're a swarm of atoms, each one hovering near the others, none of them touching, held together by electromagnetic forces, shaped by quantum mechanics, but never solid, never continuous, never actually there in the way you think you are. And the world around you, also not there, also clouds of atoms, also hovering, floating, suspended by force. You navigate through a universe of force fields, pushed and pulled by invisible interactions, never once making contact with any of it. You've lived your whole life in this world and never touched it. Or you've held the people you love and never touched them. You've felt the ground beneath your feet and never touched it. Everything you think of as physical contact is electromagnetic repulsion. Everything you think of as solid is empty space. Everything you think of as touch is hovering, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's no way to close the gap. There's no way to make true contact. The laws of physics forbid it. The fundamental forces prevent it. You are permanently, eternally, irrevocably separated from everything in the universe, not by distance. The distances are tiny, but by force, by the nature of charged particles, by the way electrons interact. You will never touch anything, not because you haven't tried, not because you haven't found the right object, because touching doesn't exist. Contact is impossible. The best you can do is get very, very close and feel the force pushing you away. That's what touch actually is. Not contact, force. Not meeting, repulsion. Your whole life you've been feeling the universe push you away, and you called it touch. The closer you try to get, the harder it pushes. The more you reach out, the more you're held back. Every attempt at contact is met with resistance. Every effort to connect is deflected by force. And that's the truth hiding inside every handshake, every embrace, every moment you thought you were touching the world. You never were. You never will be. You're just feeling the push.